What do you mean we're real, bro? Yeah. Good morning. It's time for us to start this morning, and I'm glad everybody's here. I wasn't sure what was going to happen, as in most of us, if we're going to get a foot of snow or no snow or COVID going everywhere. So I'm glad you're here today, and it's a good day for us because we're glad to have with us Drew Kaiser. And Drew's from the Leeds, Alabama, and he was here a couple of years ago, I guess now. Time goes by, but he had a good message at that time concerning how the internet and things of that nature affect our children, and we're glad to have him back. And I got thinking even last night, is Drew going to be able to make it himself with all the possibility here or there? But he's here. He can't leave. He can go ahead and snow now, but he can't leave. But we're glad he's here with us this morning. Looking forward to having him for our worship time at about 10:45, then at 5 o'clock, and then he'll be speaking to our Bible Bowl group tonight as well on this same topic. Let's get started with a word of prayer before we get started. And Glenn Barton, would you lead some prayer? Then I turn it over to Drew.
Well, it is a wonderful blessing to be here this morning, even more so than usual because of the challenges brought to us by COVID and the weather. I mean, I really didn't know even last night if I was going to get a call from you folks and say, we're not going to be able to do it. And but all the way up, my temperature on my car said 38 degrees, so maybe it'll stay that way, but I didn't know if I was going to get here. Now that I know I'm here, I know I'll be here. I don't know if I'll go home, but we'll see how the day goes, right? I enjoyed being with you. Eddie, I can't remember when that was, when we had the parent seminar, and I talked about similar things to what I'll be talking to you about today. The brethren asked me to focus on the same subjects of the internet, social media, and how it affects the Christian. If you were here for that series, I am trying to do it a little differently so that you can get some new things. There will be some review. And this morning, I want to just start the whole subject talking about boundaries. We need boundaries, especially when it comes to our technology. You know, many of us can remember back in the day when the technology had the boundaries built into it, right? Do you remember dial-up internet? If you were born before 1995, you probably remember that, maybe just a little bit. A lot of us remember it very well. When the internet first came on the scene, you had to dial in on a phone line. And there were a lot of limitations with that. Number one, you had to make sure everybody in the house was going to stay off the telephone because the internet was using the same phone line. I'll tell this story, and then after I tell it, after services, a lot of times people will come up to me and say they remember the party line. You know, when they shared a phone line, not just with their household, but with their neighbors. You know, and maybe you can't remember that, but maybe you can remember when you had to share a phone line to use the internet. And so you'd say, is anybody going to use a phone? I need to check my email. That's a sentence that you don't say anymore. You don't even think about that kind of thing. And not only that, but we paid for our internet by the minute. This idea of unlimited connection, nobody even dreamed of that. So you would have to watch the clock to make sure you didn't go over because they would hit you with charges or shut down your service until the next month. And all of us probably can remember desktop computers. In fact, you might still have one at home that you use. But those computers we all used to use were not very portable, and they had to be plugged into the wall. You certainly didn't worry at dinner about somebody looking at the internet when they should have been concentrating on conversing with their family, because it'd be kind of cumbersome to drag a desktop computer to the dinner table and plug it in and log on to the internet. Nobody would do that. We didn't have those kinds of problems in those days. But times have changed because of the portability of our mobile devices and the unlimited connection afforded to us today by technology. The boundaries are no longer built in, which means we have to set the boundaries ourselves and learn to control our technology before it starts to control us. So it's changed us. And the internet's starting to replace our minds. Instead of trying to remember something, what do? We just Google it. And we conduct ongoing, continuous conversations through messaging and social media. One researcher called this phenomenon ambient awareness. It's the idea that you feel like your virtual friends are always around you and they need a response all the time. So you'll see young people constantly on their phones, and maybe you don't do the internet the same way they do, and you wonder, what in the world are they doing? How can they spend so much time on the internet? They're engaging with their friends constantly without any break whatsoever. On average, young people spend 9 hours a day on the internet. 2 hours of that is spent on social media. 2 hours a day for a lifetime is the same amount of time that it would take to go to the moon and back 32 times, or to walk the Great Wall of China 3.5 times. That's a lot of time that we're spending on social media and in general on the internet. Is that healthy? Do we need to think about discipline and setting boundaries? I think we all agree that we do. So this morning I'm going to talk about those boundaries and think with you a little bit about what this unbridled technology does to us. So first of all, let's look at some ways that unbridled technology changes our thinking. Okay, so number one, when you don't put boundaries on your technology, what does it do to your thinking? I have a list here. So first of all, it becomes negative. You see, social media platforms have developed a business model that combines technology and connectivity to provide their customers with information. And just so you know, if you have a social media profile, you have an account on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or whatever, you are not the customer, you are a user. There's a distinction that you need to understand between users of social media and the customers. Okay, a user is somebody who has an account, and they have friends, and they have a profile, and they use it on a daily basis. They're not the customer. The customers are the big corporations that hire Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc. for your information that you're giving out for free. And they pay big money to get that information. Now, how are these companies going to keep you online enough to get information about your habits, what you like to shop for, what your political interests are, etc.? How do they keep you online? How do they plug you in? Well, they've learned that negative information draws you in more than positive information. The newspapers learned that a long time ago, right? What gets a person's attention, gets them to read newspapers? A negative headline. Well, the social media companies are doing the same thing. They know they can keep you drawn in more with negativity. So algorithms are set to put negative information in front of you, things that will stimulate you and get you to engage more often than positive. They know that if they keep it positive, like you've seen on the news, they're promising to do more of, they know that if they keep you positive, you'll get bored and get off and go do something productive. And so it's proven that it makes your makes your thinking more negative. In fact, scientists have found that people feel worse after they spend an hour on Facebook, and they feel better in interpersonal engagement with people in real time. So that's the first thing, negativity. Number two, what happens to your thinking when you don't put boundaries around your technology? Number two, it becomes less imaginative. We go to the internet for answers, right? We need a definition, we ask Google. Need to learn how to fix the dryer? Guys, what do? We go to YouTube. A lot of good information on there, right? Trying to learn how to play a song on the guitar or the piano? Get the app. Learn it from that. Want to rearrange your furniture? Look on Pinterest for ideas. Cooking dinner? Consult your favorite blog. Trying to sort out complex political or religious situation? You shouldn't do this, but what do? We go to Facebook and engage people and talk it out. Wanting to learn what's going on with your friends in the world? Check Instagram. That's how we behave now. We want information. We go to the internet for information. There's no longer any need for us to create solutions or imagine new ways of doing things or figure things out on our own. It's all right there at our fingertips on our smartphones, except it's not. You know, we think that we have more information, and in some ways we do. But the irony is, it's just making us dumber. What happens is these algorithms that the social media platforms are tuned to, they pay attention to your behavior, and they're designed to give you more of what you're interested in. So the friends that you engage with the most, they show them to you more. The information that you seem to like the most, they show you that more, and they hide the other stuff. Maybe you're someone with a lot of followers on Facebook, and you think about someone, hey, I used to see that person in my news feed all the time, and I don't see them anymore. I wonder if I'm still friends with that person. So you go to your friend list, and you search for the name, and there it is. And they've been active, and they've been engaged. You just haven't seen it. Why is that? Well, the algorithms decided that you weren't interested in that person. So they didn't show you that person. There is a narrowing of information that appears on your news feed so that you see the same kind of things over and over again, and your perception of the world becomes narrower and narrower. It makes us less imaginative. Number three, what does it do to our thinking? It becomes boring. I read a novel several years ago before I wrote my book on social media by M.T. Anderson called Feed. And it imagines a future world where people no longer use computers and smartphones because they have devices implanted into their brains. And they just access it organically in their minds. You think, well, that's horrifying, but I mean, I've seen some technologies coming out now that are very similar to that kind of thing, where you're just tuned into the internet all the time. And you would think, wow, endless entertainment, endless information, engagement with friends all the time, that's got to be a lot of fun. But in the novel, the people involved are just bored. It opens up with a bunch of kids who are on the moon, because in this future you can travel to the moon whenever you want to. And they're having this great trip on the moon, and they're going to festivals, and they're hearing bands they like on the moon, and they're enjoying playing around in low-gravity space. But they're not having a good time. In fact, the main character says everything seemed kind of sad and boring. And they also went to Mars. And what did he say about Mars? He said everything on Mars was dumb. So I think that kind of summarizes what happens when we have no limits to our entertainment. Nothing's special anymore. Nothing's interesting anymore. You don't have to wait for anything. Everything's instant gratification. There's nothing to look forward to. Nothing forbidden. Everything is possible, so nothing is possible. Everything is permissible, so nothing is enjoyable. We live in a world of limitless possibilities, and those of us who can remember the time before that may have thought that when we get here, everything's just going to be a lot of fun and interesting, but the opposite is true. We're becoming more and more bored with things as we have this limitless exposure. Number 4, what does it do to our thinking? It makes our thinking unproductive. Unproductive. As Christians, we're supposed to be looking for opportunities, right? Galatians chapter 6, verse 10. As we have opportunity, let us do good to everyone, especially those of the household of faith. We're supposed to be looking around, to be observant people, looking for opportunities to glorify God through service. James wrote in James 4:17, whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. So we've got to be looking around for the right thing to do. And opportunities are all around us, but because our noses are stuck in our smartphones, we're not seeing them. We're not seeing them. How many relationships failed because instead of engaging with the people around us, we were texting somebody on our phone, and we didn't see the potential for a new friendship? How many good deeds went undone because somebody was distracted by Instagram? How many souls have been lost because a Christian didn't train himself or herself to be looking for people around them who need the gospel? They were too busy and too distracted with their phones. One thing's sure, the longer Satan can keep us distracted, the happier he is. He wants us to be distracted. There's a book written by C.S. Lewis called The Screwtape Letters. And it's a fictional book that imagines a conversation between a chief demon named Screwtape and his apprentice Wormwood. And Screwtape is trying to teach Wormwood how to condemn human beings. And one of the strategies that he teaches his apprentice, he calls the nothing strategy. And the nothing strategy is designed to take a person to the end of his life distracted, so that at the end of his days here on earth, he looks back on his life and he says, I've wasted my life in things I neither ought to have done nor liked doing. And you exchange the word life with day, and that's kind of how you feel after a 3-hour social media binge. I've spent my time doing neither what I ought to have done nor what I liked to be doing. But we do it anyway, right? And we get distracted, and Satan is happy when we are distracted. And so it makes us unproductive. We're not seeing opportunities all around us. And it's not that we necessarily are doing anything wrong. It's just that we're not doing anything right. We're just doing nothing. So what's the answer? You know, before the service began, somebody said, "Are you going to ask me to delete my Facebook account?" I'm not going to do that because I know the world we live in. I know that, for example, if I deleted my Facebook account, I'd have a hard time communicating with folks about the work that I do. You know, like Landon and Eddie, I have to plan for guest speakers to come. And a lot of them, I don't have their contact information except for through Facebook. And so I message them through Facebook, set up speaking appointments that way. It can be a very valuable tool. We just have to set boundaries around it. So let's talk in the second place during our class hour about setting boundaries. God wants us to set boundaries around our lives. He believes that boundaries are very important. Going all the way back to physical boundaries. Look at Deuteronomy 19:14. You shall not move your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set, in the inheritance that you will hold in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Reflecting back on that, the wise man made, I believe, a metaphor out of that in Proverbs chapter 22, verse 28, when he said, "Do not move the ancient landmark that your fathers have set." In the beginning, that ancient landmark was something physical, actually drawing boundaries around land. When it came to the wise man's advice, I think he's thinking more figuratively of spiritual boundaries. Boundaries on our time, boundaries on our set of friends, boundaries on our conduct, our behavior, the places that we go. Boundaries are really important. A boundary says you can go this far and no farther. A boundary says this is mine, that is yours. A boundary says I will do this, but I won't do that. And a boundary is something that you really seriously need to think about before you get into the heat of the moment. You cannot set a boundary when alarms are going off all around you. You have to set the boundary before you face the temptation, before you face the challenge, before the dispute comes up. You have to know who you are and where you want to be. And that's what boundaries are all about. Boundaries are very helpful in practicing self-control. And don't think that you can get by in this world without self-control. You need self-control. Discipline is extremely difficult. If you don't believe that, just ask the Apostle Paul. Paul accomplished more than any of us will ever hope to. Greatest missionary in history, a man who was able to change his reality after encountering Jesus Christ from one who persecuted Christians to someone who was making disciples. And we all admire his self-control. We admire his productivity, his ability to do something that the Lord wanted him to do. But what did he say about self-control when it came to himself? He spoke as if it were very difficult for him. Look with me at 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Let's read together verses 25 and following. Listen to what Paul says about boundaries and keeping them in his life. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Now, most of the English translations have kind of rubbed out the metaphors there, but he's using some very vivid visual imagery to describe how difficult discipline is in his life. There at the end, he says, first of all, I discipline my body. If you're reading the King James, I think it says, I buffet my body, which is closer to the original language that he's using. He had just talked about boxing, and this word translated discipline or buffet in the King James is a boxing term. And he's basically saying, I beat myself in the face to do what is right, to make myself do what is right. And the next phrase is keep it under control, which was a military term descriptive of a commander leading captives after a conquest, after a victorious conquest. So he's saying, number one, I beat myself. Number two, I make myself a slave in order to do the will of God, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. As I said, boundaries are decisions you make before the temptation comes. For example, if you decide, I'm not going to drink alcohol, you make that decision. That's a good decision to make. Then you know, young people, when you're invited to a party where there's going to be alcohol, you know not to go. You've already made that decision. It's not a tough decision. It's not going to matter that your best friend is going. It's not going to matter that that guy or that girl you're interested in will be there. It's not going to matter that you may not be as popular if you don't go, because you've already made the decision. It's not hard to make before the temptation comes. Any boundaries we set, including the boundaries on our technology, need to be set before we're in the moment. And if you have that handout, look at it now. And it occurred to me that I didn't grab one for myself. And I'll explain what that's all about. This is a way that you can set boundaries in your life before you get on your phone or the computer or whatever. Now, I should have said this at the beginning. This has kind of been billed as something for young people. But all of you know that we all need this, right? You don't have to be young to have a problem with technology and smartphones. In fact, I think a lot of older people are dealing with this, especially if you're retired and you have a lot of time on your hands. It's easy to go to your device to fill that time. So you need this as much as young people. This isn't just lessons for young people, right? This is something that all of us struggle with, except for those of you that never took the dive. You know, there's some of you still using a flip phone or a landline, and you're just not going to do it, and that's great. But the rest of us need this, and all of us, regardless of technology, need to learn to set boundaries for ourselves. We all have our challenges, right? So take a look at this. This is a social media contract you can make with yourself. Parents, you might be tempted to fill this out for your child and hand it to them and say, this is the way it's going to be. But if they are not involved in it, they're just going to find a way around it, right? They're very smart. They're smarter than you are. So when it comes to technology. So sit down with them and ask them to sit down and make these decisions. So you put your name at the top, and the first, it operates on an acronym that spells out the word PACT. And PACT stands for priorities, areas, conduct, and time limits. Okay, let's think about those. First, if you're filling this out, set your priorities. Decide what's number one in your life. Now, do I need to tell you that God should be first in your life? And that His work should be the most important work to you? And His goals and purposes should be the most important goals and purposes in your life? I don't think I need to tell a crowd that braved COVID and snow to be here on a Sunday morning that God should be number one, right? But we need to fill that out, because sometimes what we say and think and what we do are two different things. Also, think of other priorities: family, career, school, other ambitions that you have in life. Whatever they are, put those down too, and ask yourself, am I giving enough time to these in order to fulfill my goals regarding them? So priorities. Secondly, look at the areas and designate areas where you will and will not use your social media. For example, there's some easy ones. Don't use it at the dinner table. I mean, first of all, we need to talk about if we're even eating at the dinner table. It's a very good time for families to bond and share at the dinner table, away from the TV set. I know a lot of us live very rushed, hectic lives. I know that. I got kids in that time of life. I ran into some people yesterday and rolled the window down as I was driving out. And I said, I'm just playing taxi driver today. And they said, yeah, I remember those days. You know, I'm always picking somebody up or taking them somewhere. It's hard. But try to sit down with your family at least once a day at the table and share what's going on in their lives. Cell phone gets in the way of that. Another obvious one is in your car. My daughter was texting me on the way up here about the snow. And I really wanted to tell her I was okay, but I waited until I got here because I want her to know that I don't drive while playing around with my phone. Thousands of people die every year just because they were looking at their cell phone. They were looking at something that didn't matter, and they gave their life up for it. Another obvious thing to me that doesn't seem so obvious to others is your bedroom at night. I don't think young people who are just starting to use their phones should even take their smartphones to their bedrooms at all. I mean, why invite the devil into your room? When you're alone, you get a sense of anonymity, nobody's watching, and if you're not real practiced at discipline, you can let that get away from you. At night, it displaces sleep, it gets in the way, and I know the excuse, hey, my alarm's on my phone. Well, you know what they're still making? They're still making alarm clocks. You can still get them. You can get clock radios, you can get all these neat little devices for really cheap. You can put by your bed, and all they do is turn on an alarm after you go to sleep at night. So you can replace the smartphone in your bedroom with that. But you choose where and where you will not use your phone. It's very important to think about the areas. Church is another one. Turn it off. You don't need it when you're worshiping God. Everything else can wait. The C stands for conduct. Think about what your words will be, where your eyes will look, what your intentions will be, what your friends and followers will be, your posts, your pictures, ahead of time. One thing to make a decision about is what kinds of conversations will I engage in? I made it a goal a long time ago not to take the bait on these religious soapboxes, these hobbies that people like to play around with on Facebook in particular. A lot of preachers like to stir things up and just get these meaningless conversations going. There's so many times when I'll see one of those dangling out there, and I know what that person is doing, and I still want to correct him. But I know that all he's doing is trying to get me engaged so he can talk about his soapbox for an hour and waste my time. And I decided a long time ago, I'm just never going to respond to any of that stuff, and I pretty much don't. And the few times I weakened and let my boundary down, I regretted it. It never goes anywhere. Time limits, that's the T. List some activities that fit your priorities and how much time you plan to spend on them. Going to church, reading your Bible, praying to God, working on your homework, working on personal growth, exercise. How much time per day do you want to spend on that? Are you going to list social media on here and say, well, I'd like to spend 2 hours a day on social media? I encourage you to use the screen time tools that are on your smartphone. Most of you have them. A lot of you don't even know that you have them, but you go into settings. You can set screen time limits for yourself and for your children to help your discipline, to build those boundaries ahead of time. I think it's important to set a bedtime and to unplug at least 30 minutes before that bedtime. The longer before bedtime, the better. The blue light illumination of screens has been proven to disrupt sleep. You have these circadian rhythms in your biology that pay attention to the light around you, and they mistake the light coming off your screen for daylight. And a lot of you may be having trouble sleeping, and you don't realize this because you look at your phone all the way up to bedtime, and then you try to put it away and close your eyes and go to sleep, and your body thinks it's in the middle of the day. And so think about that. And then sign the contract and honor it to the best of your ability. I think it'd be very helpful to fill this out. Sit down with your children, encourage them to fill it out. They're not going to want to do it. I mean, I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I get the grief. Nobody can tell me, I don't know what it's like to try to hold a teenager to their boundaries. But I can tell you this, if you get them away from their smartphones, they're a lot more pleasant because that constant negativity is not hitting them. And they're probably hating me right now for saying all this, but it's true. And if you have their interests at heart, you will help them learn before they get away from the nest how to control their technology, because if they don't, then the technology is going to control them. Well, in the few minutes I have left, I don't have much time left, I just want to talk to you about how setting these boundaries on your technology and still having the technology in your life will reverse those 4 things that happen to your thinking that we talked about at the beginning. What changes in our thinking when we set boundaries for our technology? Number 1, we become more positive. The less time you spend on social media, the happier you are. That is a scientific fact. And being a positive, optimistic person has a lot of benefits. I looked them up on Mayo Clinic's website. Increased lifespan, lower rates of depression, lower levels of distress, greater resistance to the common cold. I wonder about COVID. Maybe it helps with that too. Better psychological and physical well-being, better cardiovascular health and reduced risk of death from cardiovascular disease, better coping skills. And so it's better for your health, but overall, we want to obey the Lord, right? And we have this command repeated in several places, but we can look to an easy spot, Philippians 4:4, that says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I will say, rejoice. That's not an option. That's a command. And we need to do whatever we can in our life to fulfill that command. And if our technology is getting in the way of our joy, well, we need to get control of it. Number 2, we increase our imagination and creativity. We get off the crutch of the internet. We start trying to find solutions for ourselves. Listen, boredom is good. Boredom is not a problem that needs to be corrected. It's a good thing to sit by yourself without anything going on and let your mind work on creativity. And so you become more imaginative. Number 3, life becomes more interesting. Limitations help you see the possibilities. They don't get in the way of possibilities. Why do you think a poet chooses to write poems according to a rhyme scheme or some meter or some form? They impose the form on themselves because it releases creative energy. God himself chose to create the world in 6 days and to rest on the 7th day. Don't you think that he could have created the world in 1 day or 100 days or 300 days? But the form, the limits of the 6th day was the way he chose to express his creativity. Being made in his image, we're no different. Limitations help us to become more creative, not less. Finally, we become more productive. Freedom needs its limits. We need the liberating restrictions that set us free to become who we are meant to be. Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John chapter 8, verse 32. Truth is a constrictive thing, right? It sets boundaries around us. Yet Jesus said that's where our freedom is, because no one is absolutely free. Paul said in Romans 6:16 that we are slaves of the one whom we obey. And all of us are obeying either sin or righteousness. It's just a question of who you want your master to be. Do you want technology to be your master? Do you want Satan to be your master with his strategy of nothingness? Or do you want God, who knows what's best for you and who loves you, to have the control of your life? So I want to encourage you as we start today talking about these things to set a contract with yourself, set some boundaries around your life, control your technology before it controls you. Thanks a lot.